You guys have to be so excited to be part of the 25th anniversary of Writers Week. It's pretty amazing. Why don't you guys look at your English teacher right now and thank them for bringing you? Give them a big shout out. I want to hear the names. This is my 21st Writers Week, and I have to tell you that watching and listening to students is one of my favorite part of Writers Week. So I know you're going to totally appreciate this hour. When you have a chance, I want you to thank your booster parents. I want you to thank Mr. Anderson and Mrs. Inc. Even if you don't know them, go up to them and just give them a fist pump or something, I don't know. And thank your English teachers like you just did, okay? So we've got a girl power right here. I love it. Like little, give it up for the girls. I just lost my train of thought. Allie Kim is up, so we're gonna let her go.
Good morning. Shout out to Miss OD's third period class. My piece is called Alexandra and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Haircut. Have you ever left the salon after a haircut and thought to yourself, what on earth did they just do to my hair? If you've had at least one haircut in your life, the answer is an unequivocal yes. I've come to realize that death and taxes are not the only two things you can count on in life. There's a third, a bad haircut. In your lifetime, you're guaranteed to come upon a hairstylist who will downright ignore your request and do whatever the heck they please. Last year, my hair had grown to a point where it was starting to look straggly and witch-like. When I asked my friend if she thought I needed a trim, she replied, "You could," which was the nice way of saying, "Your hair looks revolting. Get it cut." Looking back, I now realize that my hair was not witch-like, but more mermaid-like. Those beautiful, luxurious locks were everything I had ever wanted. I walked into the salon feeling confident that I wouldn't be screwed over. My hair was long enough that even if my stylist were to cut more than requested, I would still have something to work with. I still made my directions clear. After she rinsed my hair and threw the cape around me, I said in my most serious tone, "Give me the smallest trim you have ever given in your entire life." Easy, right? No way to misinterpret that. She laughed it off and grabbed her tools, but just to make absolutely sure, I re-emphasized, "No, I'm serious. You can even leave some split ends." She assured me not to worry as I took a final glance at my shoulder-length hair. I couldn't see what was going on, but after I heard the scissors cut across my hair a mere 2 times, I knew I was screwed. Unfortunately, I had decided to come alone, so nobody was there to say, "Stop! This lady should not be qualified to cut hair." I was overcome with the helpless, out-of-control feeling. I knew right away that disastrous consequences awaited me. I sat there silently, watching beautiful locks of my hair fall in front of my feet. Meanwhile, she chatted away as if all was right with the world, while mine was falling apart. When she finished, I swiveled around to look at her handiwork. I wasn't the least bit surprised by what I saw. It's what I deserved for being stupid enough to get my hair cut in the first place. The mirror in front of me displayed what was left of my hair. My mermaid locks were gone, dead, a thing of the past. Instead, I was left with the lob of one long strand on each side of the front that she must have sincerely believed passed as layers. Perhaps she wanted me to have 2 pieces of long hair to remember how good it used to look. I couldn't tell you. But it seems like the mantra of most hairstylists is, "Hair? You don't need this. I'm going to chop it all off and ignore your very clear directions." A bad haircut has the potential to affect everything. The way you see yourself and how others see you. But of course, when she asked what I thought, I could only muster a weak, "I love it." Better to walk around with a hideous haircut than to hurt the poor woman's feelings. Other things can be repaired. Phones, cars, but not hair. Nothing can be done about it. I don't know what the solution is. Maybe all haircuts could be done in stages to avoid disaster and trauma. After each inch, they could spin you around and ask permission to proceed, as opposed to waiting until the end when you have no choice and they've ruined your life. Maybe bad haircuts are inevitable. Or maybe you just have to manipulate them with lies. Lie your ass off. If you want a bob, say you want your hair to reach your shoulders. If you want it to your chin, say you just want to cut your split ends. Whatever the solution may be, I'm positive about one thing. Whoever said you can count on death and taxes needs to give me their hairstylist number pronto, because I need to get a haircut. Next, I'd like to welcome Veronica Voida.
Hi guys, I'm Veronica, and today I'm going to be reading my essay that I wrote for the University of Chicago. The prompt was, you're on a voyage in the 13th century, sailing across tempestuous seas. What if suddenly you fell off the edge of the earth? Marco Polo's brother, Paolo Polo, was a pathetic man and knew it. Called Pee-Pee since boyhood, Paolo always felt dejected about himself and his masculinity. Marco was manly, adventurous, and charming. Paolo liked poetry. He was ceaselessly shoved aside by his father for Marco's fame, fortune, and sex appeal, and was sick of the constant disregard he received from every woman he met. As Paolo grew older, his sensitive nature turned avaricious, and the disdain for his brother grew. Finally, at 25, tired of the neglect from his father and from the public, and desperate for attention and fame, he decided to do what Marco would never dare, sail outside of the Mediterranean and past Europe. The crew that Paolo employed with his father's money had grown anxious the moment they departed from the Venetian port. Nonetheless, Paolo didn't care. He needed to discover something. And what he discovered was that he had horrible seasickness. Paolo laid in the captain's quarters as his men worked the boat until smooth waters turned turbulent and treacherous. Ready to scold the sailors for yelling about on deck instead of stabilizing the ship, Paolo exited the quarters and was shocked to see that the boat was tipping on its side, about to fall off the edge of the earth. And then they fell off the edge of the earth. Paolo and his crew had been free-falling for about a few hours and maybe a day or possibly a week and a half, it didn't really matter, is that they were grateful that the aggressive whistling in their ears had finally subsided once they stopped falling. The ship was sailing in peaceful waves near the sandy shore. Paolo thought that the event that had just surpassed was a hallucination due to excess snorting of sea salt, until the crew was shouting that the ship was literally sailing on sand and that they needed to dock onto the water. The crew pulled up to the water's edge and dropped the anchor, and instead of sinking, the hunk of iron effortlessly bounced off the water's surface. Paolo and the crew, more bamboozled than ever before, somehow managed to berth the vessel to the water and discuss the plan of action. It was decided unanimously among the sailors, but not Paolo, to disembark the ship and look for help, so that they may be able to return home. It proved very difficult to walk on water. Even with it being solid, the water's undulating movements made it very hard to keep one's balance. Paolo had another spout of seasickness that unfortunately splattered onto the crew members. The crew walked along the opposite shore, and Paolo crawled behind, and only after a few short miles were crossed, another person loomed in the distance. The crewmen, elated, ran towards and huddled around the person. Finally, Paolo picked himself up from the water's edge and joined his men and the stranger. Immediately upon seeing the stranger's face, Paolo hurled once more. The person was a young man, but was wearing his skin inside out. His body was red and glistening, his nose upside down, and his hair growing towards his brain. He seemed to be inverted. As Paolo tried to receive answers for his questions, the man replied in what sounded like Italian, but he spoke the language reversed and seemed to be sucking the words from the atmosphere rather than projecting them out. Paolo was overcome with unease as he stared at the man. They shared striking similarities, such as a misshapen left ear, although the stranger's was sewed on backwards and upside down. Then it dawned upon Paolo that he was looking at himself. This opposite world that they had arrived in was actually Paolo's own personal purgatory. Frightened and disgusted, Paolo ditched the gang and ran back towards the boat. Soon after, the rest of the crew joined him, and they were ready for the next order of business. Paolo wanted to go home. So did the rest of the sailors. The one minor detail that Paolo and the rest of the crew members kept reverting back to was that they didn't know exactly how to return home. The only thing the sailors could do was what they did best, sail. So the ship embarked on its second journey, moving swiftly through sand and dirt. As days passed without changing scenery, Paolo lost hope and retreated back to the captain's quarters as his men worked the boat until the smooth waters turned turbulent and treacherous. Ready to chastise the crew for shouting about on deck instead of stabilizing the ship, Paolo left the quarters and was stunned to see that the opposite world was fading away, and instead the boat was starting to sail through the fabrication of the universe. The ship was recklessly spinning and crashing into numbers and symbols, breaking the gridwork that held all the worlds together. As Paolo threw up uncontrollably, the crew managed to anchor the ship and disembark once again. Paolo wiped the bile off his face and squared his shoulders like a proud man, following the crew off the vessel. The numbers and symbols crunched under his feet as the incessant metallic clacking surrounded and suffocated the men. No words could be heard over the noise as the shrill ticking began to shroud their vision. The grid's branches were snapping underneath the weight, and they started to sink into the darkness beneath them. Realizing that he would have never been in this predicament if it weren't for his rapaciousness, Paolo started to cry. As he wailed, the sailors screamed until they were all swallowed entirely by the nothingness below them and snuffed out like candles. Up next is Grace Downing.
Okay, hello, hi. So I'm Grace, and I'm gonna be reading a couple poems for you guys today. So this first poem is based off of something that happened to me. And I could tell you the story behind it, but I think this is one of those poems that doesn't need to be explicitly explained. I think you can see in this poem whatever you want to see in it, and ultimately get out of it what resonates most with you. So with that, this poem is called Night Visions. Darkness, speckled with starlight. Cold screen pressed to my ear, her soft voice floating through. A cinched throat, choking on something, on a forming idea, no, an inevitable future. My voice unreachable, hers a tether, soft and strong and enduring, tugging at my heartstrings, opening my tear ducts. Wet eyes, damp cheeks, the inevitable future, sinking in, finally. Turning from the others, closing my eyes, dredging up the voice of someone unburdened with knowing, telling her I love her while staring at the same darkness, speckled with starlight. Hanging up, feeling the tether snap. Starlight flickers, strings tug, my heart cracks. So that was the first poem. So for this next poem, I wrote it off of a prompt from my creative writing class. The title is Where I'm From, and it's based off a poem with the same title by Georgia L. Lyon, in which she describes significant memories that shaped her childhood. So this is about some things that have shaped my life so far. Where I'm from. I'm from big family gatherings, from meeting acquainted strangers and devouring endless platters of food. I'm from preemptive lectures, from hot peppers and numb fingers and learning how to properly swear. I'm from a lifelong movie education, from Martys and Docs and cousins named Vinny. I'm from an enduring mother and a hopeful father in all the times that mattered to me. And I'm from a longing to move forward, at war with a nostalgia that always lingers in a home that sheds memories constantly. Everything tinged bittersweet. I'm from where I was, from the choices I've made about what I can't control. I'm from the memories I'll get to, eventually. So for this poem, unlike my first one, I'd like to explain some of the references to give you a clearer picture of my family. So the mention of hot peppers is from when my family was at a Mexican restaurant, and my uncle's dinner came with a pepper. He was wondering if it was hot, and my grandmother said with the utmost confidence, "That pepper isn't hot." So, in complete trust of my grandmother, my uncle decided to take a huge bite out of it. It was a really hot pepper, and it caused him quite a bit of discomfort that day. It's been a few years since that incident, and we still joke about it whenever we go back to that restaurant. And in terms of the movies that have shaped me, I was referencing the Back to the Future trilogy and My Cousin Vinny, which were films that seemed to be played on repeat throughout my childhood. My family quotes those movies in our daily life all the time. In fact, My Cousin Vinny, along with my father, did much to teach me the art of proper swearing, and that all words, including swear words, can be effective in the right time and place. So my point in all this is that the stories we have about our families, and really anyone we love, are carried with us throughout the years and play a big role in shaping who we are and who we eventually become. Ultimately, sharing and remembering stories, and I mean all stories, the joyful ones and the funny ones and the painful ones, is what this week, at least for me, is all about. So I hope both these poems resonated with you in at least some small way and brought to light the power storytelling has to bring people together. Thank you. Up next is Sarah Madden.
Shout out to Mrs. Ing's third period class. Okay. At the end of my sophomore year, the last thing I imagined is that I'd spend 60% of my summer working in a retirement home. Now, this is not ideal for any 16-year-old, but as far as part-time jobs go, I figured that serving old people their food couldn't be too bad. I worked nearly every day, and eventually every shift blended into one another. I do specifically remember one day, though. It was early July, and all my coworkers had decided to go home early, leaving the freshly trained and clueless 16-year-old to finish up. As I washed tables and set up for the next day, the sun was setting in the corner of the dining room, and sunbeams of golden light poured in from each window. I washed tables for what felt like forever and thought about all the fun my friends were probably having on a typical summer night. As I worked my way to the edge of the room, I got to one of the residents that was still sitting there and staring idly out the dining room window. I tried to be polite and ask how they were doing, but I got no response, just a muffled grunt as they stared aimlessly. It wasn't until I was just about to walk away that he said, seemingly out of nowhere, that he's incredibly passionate about people watching through the dining room windows. I didn't have a response, partly because I didn't understand why he said this. So all I said was, "Oh, okay," and walked away. This wasn't the only weird interaction I'd had with a resident, though. I'd be pouring coffee one day, and they'd randomly tell me about how the 4th of July was their favorite holiday because they always spent it with their cousins. Or they'd tell me about the trip they took to Florida when they were 7. I never had to ask, but many of the residents would tell me stories about when they were little, or their opinions on God or politics or the stock market. If I'm gonna be honest, at first, I didn't really get it. I know that they had plenty of friends in their retirement home, and they talked to each other constantly, so why bother to tell your teenage waitress anything about your life? Though as the weeks there stretched into months, I began to get it more. The residents that were once the most friendly would now get closed off or angry or wouldn't even say hello back to me. I thought I had done something wrong, but my boss simply reminded me that not all of them stay the same as their health declines. That's when I began to get it. They told me about their childhood and their grandchildren and their opinions because they just wanted someone to hear their story. They all lived out individual and fascinating lives, and I think that they really just wanted one other person in the world to know about it, even if it was a teenager who was a total stranger to them. None of them were celebrities or won a Nobel Peace Prize, but they all had ways of telling me how they added a little bit to the world. All of their stories made me think, what am I gonna say about my life when I'm 80? I'd always thought that the greatest highlights of my life right now would mention the clubs I do, activities I take, or the classes that I love. Though when the residents at my job told me about the stories of the lives they led, they told me about the friends they laughed with, the dumb decisions they made, the people they had loved, and the places they saw. This got me thinking about the actual stories I'll share from being a kid. Maybe I'll talk about the time my soccer team lost the championship because I scored in the wrong goal, the time I almost burned my house down because I microwaved Kraft mac and cheese without water, or maybe I'll just talk about the time I spent with my friends and my family. As firm students, I think a lot of us have too much of our identity tied up into our GPA or what we got on the latest physics test. There's a lot more to high school than that, though, and a lot more to ourselves than our grades or sports or the colleges that we get into, because eventually we'll all be 80 someday, sharing stories about the dumb things we all did when we were kids. That summer day, when I asked the man how he was as I washed tables, I learned a little bit more about the life of a man that I would know nothing about otherwise. And his simple comment ended up sparking a whole conversation about his former career as a photographer and his hobby of taking pictures of strangers on the street in high school. Don't get me wrong, it's good to place importance on school, but don't spend all your time simply trying to tread water from due date to due date. Take some of the pressure off yourself and just enjoy being a kid, because maybe one day you'll end up telling your teenage waitress about all the fun you had as a teenager. Thank you. Up next is Varsha Krishnan.
Shout out to Mrs. Ang's third period class again. Okay. This is called The Girl Who Lived. She watched as they stormed the halls of the house, destroying anything that stood in their way. She stood compliantly as they set fire to the rooms, too frightened to move, speak, fight. She forced herself up against a wall, attempting to disguise herself. She was aware that if they saw her or heard her, that would be the end. She took the chance and ran, ignoring the deafening screams that echoed through the halls of her home. With one last, longing glance, her eyes brimming with tears, she sprinted out the door, bidding goodbye to her parents, abandoning her childhood home, and forsaking life as she knew it. She was a young girl, just 16 years old. She had done nothing to hurt anyone in her life. She went about her own business, going to school, hanging out with friends, anything else that could be expected from a normal teenager. She had lived a normal life. But all of a sudden, everything changed. Just a few years prior, a neighbor's house had gone up in flames, 7 dead, 2 injured, soon 9 dead, no survivors. The authorities had been alerted, but they took no real action. They investigated the case for a couple of days and moved on when the next big thing happened. It had become too common an occurrence. Houses were being burnt down day by day, night by night. It was once a conversation, but at this point, it was just an inevitable thing, with no reasoning behind it and no way to stop it. The discussion became a cycle, one with questionable logic and a lack of empathy. It was no longer a question of human lives, but rather a political discussion. Soon enough, 4 houses on their street had been burnt down, attacked, vandalized. Each had made headlines for a day or two, but then were swiftly forgotten. A police patrol was dispatched to the neighborhood, but they were unable to stop the crimes. Within the next year, 3 more families were killed, 3 more houses were burnt down, and 3 more long Twitter battles ensued between political parties, none of which ended in a real solution. She should have seen it coming. She should have known that she would have been next. But she had been desensitized. She had been distanced from the tragedies. They were news stories, not real life. Never once did she think that anything could happen to her family or to her. It was always other people. So hearing her parents shout for help, being paralyzed with fear as strange people entered her home wishing for a miracle, someone, something, anything to help her, were unwelcome feelings. She had escaped, one of the first survivors in an incident like this, but she wished she hadn't. What did she have to offer this cruel world? It took her parents, it took her siblings, her home. They had so much life left in them, but they would never get to live it. She vowed to get vengeance. They would know her name and her story. She would once and for all put an end to all this unnecessary, unprompted violence. And she tried. She really did. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the only emotion she could muster was devastation. Devastation is defined as severe and overwhelming shock or grief, but that didn't even begin to cover the true emotion. The endless pain, the sleepless nights, the constant remorse, wishing to return to that exact moment. Living with the knowledge that things could have gone differently, witnessing the suffering of others, hiding the guilt of surviving. She wondered what life would have been like if her family was still alive and their lives were normal. Maybe they'd be sitting on the porch discussing college and summer vacations, laughing over a ridiculous joke at the dinner table. She drove herself insane replaying her last moments with them. She could have saved them, if only she had been brave enough to fight back, clear-headed enough to lead them out of the house, strong enough to sacrifice herself for them. All she wanted to do was move on, to open up a new chapter in her life, but there was always something that held her back. She fell into a deep depression. She spoke to no one. She ate little to nothing. She sat staring emptily into the horizon. Her hopes and dreams and future all dissipated in an instant. Nothing could help. Nothing would help. In the end, she became a headline. The news read, 13 dead in 4th house fire of the year, 1 lone survivor. She became a story. People made assumptions about her life and her experiences. They wove a narrative to fit their needs. Never once did they give her a name. She was always the young survivor, the girl who lived. Nothing less and nothing more. Next, I'd like to welcome Maya Duberstein.
Shout out to Mrs. Ing's 3rd period class. Last one, I promise. Okay, so this is a letter to my past self, but I guess it's also kind of like an apology to anyone who knew me in junior high. Dear poor 8th grade Maya, you're a mess, you know that? Let's just get it out of the way now. You look ridiculous. First off, those bracelets. Those are disgusting. Yeah, you like emo bands, everyone can tell. You don't have to wear those every day for everyone to believe you. It's kind of gross because you know some of those cheap rubber bracelets are getting nasty and you, without exaggeration, have over 20 bracelets on. Calm down. And those band t-shirts are not flattering you. You wear the same 3 Pierce the Veil t-shirts every day. Just calm it down with the whole emo thing. Look, I know that you think the way you are is the way you will be the rest of your life, but not only is that absolutely wrong, that's just a terrible way to live your life. You're 13.
You have no reason to believe that you have no room for change or that you have control over every single thing in your life. And that's okay, trust me. Things get way better if you just accept that not everything has to be the same forever. You may think that you want that, but I know that you don't actually. So as to avoid confusion, I will list out what to consider changing. Your outfit, which we've already discussed, your studying methods, your friend circle, and your mindset. Let's talk about your studying methods. This is a big one because you essentially don't have any. You're in geometry now, and you know you probably shouldn't be. It's hard, but even though other people might be having a hard time too, you shouldn't just accept that you're doing badly and give up. Just doing your homework and listening to your teacher won't help if you don't understand a single thing. You might be painfully awkward and will probably embarrass yourself the moment you open your mouth, but just go and ask for help. It's a very simple sounding thing, but it's hard to actually gather the courage and just speak up. You'll learn the hard way when you run out of A-push your sophomore year sobbing out of embarrassment and frustration. And your friend circle. Oof. Another thing that's essentially non-existent. But let me tell you truthfully, some of the people you're spending time with are just plain mean. Don't waste your time trying to preserve friendships with people that low-key kind of don't like you. If your mom, who's a therapist, and then your own personal therapist tell you that someone is toxic, you better believe them. You're a 13-year-old who thought it was a good idea to let your friend attempt climbing up our apartment building. Your judgment is invalid in this case. Lastly, and most importantly, your mindset is not great. Again, I know it's hard. It gets worse if I'm being honest, but part of it's because of how long we've kept everything to ourselves. You'll come to learn that the way that you feel and think isn't just you being annoying. You kind of have clinical depression, and it seems like everyone but you knows. And it's not your fault. It's not because you're weak or because you expect too much. It's a literal chemical imbalance that isn't uncommon in our family history, and I've only come to know that recently. But just because it's something you were born into doesn't mean you should have to just accept it. This is another time you should ask for help. Instead of staying up until 4 in the morning, criticizing every single thing you do and hating being the way you are, just accept help. Mom cares. Dad cares. Your therapist cares. And when you finally comply with your mom's desire to have you meet with a psychiatrist, you'll learn that he cares too. No matter how much you think it's only pity or obligation, they care. If not for yourself, at least start trying for them. And it's just not worth sitting and waiting for it to go away. I spent years hating myself, being exhausted and irritated by everything, and just feeling like waking up or breathing wasn't worth it. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't make yourself suffer. It's scary, I know, but it'll be okay, I promise. If there's anything to take out of this, know that things get better as long as you let them. Despite your weird music interests and questionable sense of humor, people seem to want to befriend you. Don't shut them out. Don't purposely make them uncomfortable so they leave you alone. Let people in and be comfortable with yourself. I have faith in you. You'll do fine. You'll be fine. With deepest sympathy, the older and wiser high school Maya. Next up is Stephanie Zahn.
Hello to Mr. Cavalleri's third period class. The end of the world was blue. She had thought that it would have gone off in a blast, a burning red sky, sparks flying through the air, a ground covered in broken things, fire and brimstone, explosive, loud and demanding, a final showdown of trumpets and cannon blasts, a grand performance to remember, red and orange, rage and smoke. Instead of a molten red sky, it was shaded with blue, cold frost freezing the ground, the pale, honest sky, the endless expanse of the ocean, white foam dotting waves of indigo gray, salt instead of sulfur in the air. It wasn't a crescendo of fire and sulfur, it was the gray ashes of a dying fire, gray ashes of a dead fire. Quiet, unhappy, lonely, cold. She's stuck on this island, waiting for the end of time, waiting for the sun to come crashing down and engulf her in a world in fire and heat. Burn her up, burn away the cold so she can finally feel warm. The end of the world was silent. She could scream all she wanted, wail and cry in the cloudy gray sky until her voice bled out against the rocks. Rip it apart and scatter it in the wind. Ask the ocean, why am I still here? The ocean offers no words. The silence pierces her through her heart, a looming eldritch creature, too big to defeat and too powerful to drive away. Freezing ice that chills you to the bones, that saps away heat until you forget the feeling of warmth. There were only waves brushing against rocks, bitter tears dripping down the edge of a cliff, a buried secret within the sea. Icy, whipping wind, thick clouds covering the sun, alone. She walks along the edge of the ocean sometimes, walks into the ocean, feels the rough sand beneath her feet, pale yellow, almost white, the only not blue in the whole world. The ocean is frigid and unforgiving. She stares out to the endless water and thinks about diving in, swimming away from the cliff on the hill, swimming away from the deafening silence and loneliness, sinking to the very bottom of the sea, cocooned in the icy cold depths, so cold that it's almost warm, safely tucked away from silence and loneliness, protected and free. The pressure couldn't snap her bones or crush her lungs. If they did, it didn't matter anyway. She thinks about going farther and farther out, wondering if there's any life under the water, ghostly jellyfish and glowing anglerfish, a creature who knew nothing, was known to no one, so far removed from the rest of the world that it couldn't feel the aftermath of everything coming crashing down. She thinks about it some more and decides to jump another day, always another day. Forever trapped on this cliff by the ocean, a bitter place that was too barren, too silent, too cold to stay, but too comforting to leave. The first time the sun comes out in a long time, she cries. Her tears are warm, warm as sunlight. Gentle gold rays breathe a bit of life into the island. It melts the frost away. It warms her skin, her hair, her hands. It doesn't burn her up, doesn't heat her very soul until she no longer can feel the chill, but softens it, softens the endless waves of blue, softens the harsh wind into a mere breeze. It leaves almost as quickly as it came, leaves a promise wrapped in its warmth. It promises to return someday. The frost returns with vengeance. It numbs her fingers and toes and drowns out any remaining warmth. Though the cold buries the feelings of the sun's rays, she hides away the memories of them in a place where no chill can reach. She knows that the sun will come back eventually, so she waits. It becomes a cycle. The sun appears briefly, then disappears for a long, long time. And when it leaves again, it leaves the same promise. Someday, somewhere, the faint rays would chip away at the ice and fill the emptiness, the loneliness, with something warm and comforting. Someday the cold wouldn't be as powerful, as brutal. Someday the world might be filled with more than just shades of blues and yellows. The end of the world was blue, but perhaps someday it didn't have to be. And next up is Lydia Hom.
Shout out again to Miss O'D's class. This is just my college essay. It's edited so it's less desperate to impress, I guess. I fumble onto my bicycle and pedal into the forest preserve, cars roaring at my back. After a couple heartbeats, my body already feels like an immovable weight. I pant for air. I'm dreamily gazing at the tall trees that line the trail when a clearing opens up and I notice 5 grazing deer. I freeze. They freeze. I want to reach out and pet one. Then I imagine wild suspicion in their black, beady eyes, and I feel a tingling sensation in my body. Fear. I pedal away without daring to look back. I ended up becoming this embarrassing spectacle because I had dubbed myself a transcendentalist. It all started when I read Into the Wild, which many of you may read. It described the life of Chris McCandless, who had abandoned a comfortable life for self-sufficient real living. Into the Wild also contained snippets of books that had influenced McCandless, so enthralled with the ideals of rugged independence, the purity of nature, the renunciation of possessions, I resolved to read these books myself. Until then, I tried to read a wide variety of books, but as I tracked down the illusions in Into the Wild, my reading choices became so restricted that, while every book provided a new perspective, they all supported the same ideas. Walden praised the peace of simple living. War and Peace mocked aristocratic greed. The Call of the Wild supported adaptability in unfamiliar circumstances. I fell into an ever-tightening spiral of books that revolved around the virtues of roughing it and the hollowness of civilization. And as I consumed more of these books, my own life started morphing into a crumbling image of myself that wasn't completely truthful. Picturing myself as a diehard nature lover, I biked around frozen lakes in the winter, shivering like a marshmallow underneath my ridiculously large parka. I'd listen for the cracks in the ice that heralded springtime, the loud scrape of my bicycle tires scaring away stray birds along the path. Afterward, I would write cheesy poems about finding truth in nature and running away from the coldness of civilization, not noticing my hypocrisy as I continued to regularly purchase steaming cups of hot chocolate at Starbucks. So much for rejecting society's comforts. I downgraded my cell phone, planning to rid myself of the distractions of technology, but I continued to play with my old smartphone at home, unable to rid myself of it forever. Worst of all, I waxed romantic to my friends about my dreams of living the rough life in Alaska when I knew nothing about it and was afraid of the wild. I ran away from deer, for God's sake. This false persona was bound to fade away with time. When the passion eventually did cool, I was left feeling embarrassed but reflective. It wasn't the first time I'd gotten carried away by a fanciful obsession. There was a time I thought I was an emo and went around sporting big black overcoats and bangs that covered half my face. There was a time I thought I was a fangirl and listened to K-pop nonstop. This time it happened to be some skewed travesty of transcendentalism. But thankfully, I recently received some unsolicited yet meaningful advice from a random guy at Starbucks. Anatomy is destiny. Apparently Freud said that. The point is that we will be happiest being who we are meant to be, rather than trying to become someone we are not. While I can't answer the dramatic soul-searching question of who am I, I've at least learned that imitation doesn't equal identity. I'm not a transcendentalist. I like novels and video games. I can't tolerate spicy food, but I can still live through the pain for a strand of ramen. I spend hours at Starbucks, but I hate coffee. There's no neat label that can define me by itself, and I know that now. I haven't completely given up transcendentalism. I still love my favorite books from that period of my life. My smartphone is officially broken, and I'm not planning on replacing it, but maybe I'm just lazy. And I still love to watch deer from a reasonably safe distance away, but I know in the end, I am simply me. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's give it up for the girls. And it looks like we have some time for some questions, so let's think of some good ones. Questions. Okay, whoever you are, up on the left. Yell it out.
What's your favorite emo band?
For Maya? Maya, what's your favorite emo band?
I'd have to say Pierce the Veil or All Time Low.
Two of you know that band. Questions? Go ahead. Whoever has a hand up. Sarah, where do you work?
Well, I don't work there anymore, but I used to work at Solstice Senior Living Center. It was the old Tamarack.
You got a woo on that one. Woo! Lydia, how did you just start talking to the Starbucks guy? Where did that come from? Like, why did he just go up to you and give you that Freudian quote? How'd that happen?
I was just doing homework with my friend at Starbucks, but then this random guy came over and he was like, "Oh my God, you guys look so young. Like, how old are you?" And then like we said we were high schoolers, and then he got surprised. But then like he saw my friend's like homework and he was like, "Oh, what is that?" And then she was like, "Oh, it's math." And he was like, "Oh, do you want to do that when you're older?" And she was like, "No, I want to be a pharmacist." And then I don't know, he just started giving us life advice.
That's when you're like, I'm busy. Old man. Questions? Right here. Is this for everyone? Who's it for? Veronica.
For her piece about when you're describing hollow stuff in his own personal hell, what does that reflect in your own life?
Can you hear her? Okay, can you repeat that?
What?
In your piece about where you're describing Paulo being stuck in his own personal hell, what does that reflect in your own life?
Like what's my own personal hell?
Well, why did you choose to write about someone's personal hell?
Well, actually I wrote this the day before it was due. So that was Halloween, and
I have a tradition with my best friend to go trick-or-treating every year because I love candy and why not get it for free. So I had like a 2-hour time constraint and I was just writing whatever came to my head. And it kind of made a mess, but it worked, but I wasn't accepted. So, yeah.
So where are you going to go, Veronica? Have you decided? Do you want to tell us or no?
Marquette and UIC.
UIC is my alma mater. Questions? We have some time still, right? Question?
Right here.
Okay.
All right, this is for all of you.
This is for all of you.
Why did you choose to write what you wrote about?
Why'd you choose to write what you wrote about? Great one.
Long answer. Wow, if there was an apocalypse and you were the only person left, that would be kind of messed up, wouldn't it? Short answer, I wanted to write that jellyfish line.
I was just searching for a common app topic.
I just had a really bad haircut experience.
College application.
My first poem was kind of about a pivotal moment in my life, so I wanted to write it down before I just forgot everything. And then the second poem I had to write for my creative writing class, but it ended up not being bad, so that's why I did it.
So I wrote this after I quit my job, and I was kind of like reflecting on like what I learned there. So yeah.
I originally wanted to write a letter to my best friend, but then like he didn't talk to me for a week, so I just wrote about myself.
I initially wrote it for English last year, but then I kind of felt bad about being in Mrs. Ng's class and not presenting at Writers Week.
How did your uncle get the hot pepper to kind of subside? What'd you guys do to him? Oh, milk? Okay. And let him suffer, she says. One last question. One last question. Just yell it out. Hey, Maya.
The letter you almost wrote to your friend. Are you still friends with that person now, or are they out of your life?
Okay, there's like a long story for like why he wasn't talking to me, but like we're good now, so yeah, it's all good.
And on that note, give these girls a last round of applause. Great job. Have a great fourth period, guys.